Now that we have a bit of the housekeeping out of the way, I'd like to invite Ms. Karen Rod Musterman, Acting Evaluator General for the African Development Bank, to please share her opening remarks. Karen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Kristen. And good morning to all colleagues and all participants, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Independent Development Evaluation and the Transition States Coordination Office, I am pleased to welcome you to this webinar on reinforcing the engagement of the African Development Bank Group in fragile situations. This webinar stems from a recent independent evaluation of the Bank Group's strategy for addressing fragility and building resilience in Africa for the period 2014-2019, which was led by Clément Bancé, who is one of our speakers today, and he will tell you about the findings of the evaluation. So during the 2014-2019 period, the AfDB approved 354 operations for 22 transition states, representing an overall amount of $6.5 billion US. So that's a considerable level of support. Now, of this amount, $440 million US was allocated to 34 non-sovereign operations supporting the private sector, so about 10%. Now, the evaluation, which was completed in 2020, had two objectives. Firstly, to report to stakeholders on the performance of the AfDB's assistance in transition states, and secondly, to draw lessons from the bank's experience to inform the bank's next strategy for addressing fragility and building resilience, which will cover the period 2022 to 2026. The evaluation was timely because it took place at the conclusion of the current bank strategy, and as such, its findings and recommendations will inform the preparation of the new strategy. And our first speaker, Emile Kemayu from the Transition States Coordination Office, will tell us more about that process. The evaluation looked at the relevance of the strategy, the bank's approach and commitments to transition states, the bank's contribution to reducing fragility and building resilience, and its institutional effectiveness for implementing the strategy. The evaluation report was presented to the AfDB Board of Directors in July 2020, and it's available on our website. So in this webinar, we will share the findings and recommendations from the independent evaluation and the bank's plans for addressing the issues raised in the evaluation and the way forward for the new fragility and resilience strategy. So we look forward to insightful discussions about addressing fragility, and we hope that you will gain and share your knowledge on strategic and operational engagement in situations of fragility in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. I'd now like to pass the floor to Emile Kemayu, Chief Fragility and Resilience Officer, who will speak to us, provide a presentation on the roadmap for the AfDB engagement in fragile situations. Emile, over to you.
Thank you very much, Christine, and dear colleagues and participants. On behalf of RDTS management, I would like to thank you for being with us today to get to understand what we do in terms of fragility on the continent. As indicated earlier by both Christine and Karen, this learning event actually follows the BDEV evaluation of the current strategy of the bank. The strategy was supposed to end in 2020, but clearly because we wanted to take into account the recommendation from the BDEV evaluation and other emerging challenges on the continent, the board actually extended the strategy until the end of 2021. So we are currently working to take into account, to build on all the lessons learned so that we can have a new strategy that will actually address all the lapses that may have been observed. So the presentation will focus on the strategic approach of the bank group to addressing fragility and building resilience, and on explaining how operationally the fragility lens should be applied in strategy and programming. I'm going to ask my colleague Riyad if he can help me with the slides. So we can now go to the first slide. Yes. Riyad, the first slide, please. Hello, Riyad, are you connected?
Do you want me to share what you shared with me?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Okay.
Okay. Next. All right, thank you. That's the first slide. Now, just by way of background, it is critical to emphasize that the Bank Group has been one of the first multilateral organizations to institutionalize the fragility agenda as part of a business model. You know, the creation of a dedicated organizational unit, the establishment of the post-conflict country facility in ADF 10 already, you know, and we also had the fragile state facility in ADF 11 and the transition support facility in ADF 13. Those were very critical milestones which empower the Bank Group with resources and instruments supporting the implementation of its fragility agenda. Then we have the analytical tools, the financial innovations and successive adjustment of the resource allocation framework that we have put in place over the last 5 ADF cycle. Those actually allow the, to channel increased volume of resources to transition states and also shapes the fund's operational engagement toward addressing national and regional drivers of fragility in the continent. Of course, you know, the road travel and these operational toolkits were grounded in 2 successive strategic frameworks, namely the 2008 strategy for enhanced engagement in fragile state and the 2014 strategy for addressing fragility and building resilience. So that's the strategy that we are currently on. The lesson learned from the implementation of the 2008 strategy for enhanced engagement and the 2012 independent evaluation already conducted by BDEF also, plus the recommendation from the high-level panel that was set by the then president of the bank, you know, to provide, to look into the fragility agenda, were very critical in developing the current 2014-2019 strategy. And the strategy is grounded in the Bank Group's 2013 to 2022, the 10-year strategy, you know, with withdraws on other institutional strategy, you know, such as the governance action plan, the private sector development strategy, the gender strategy, the human capital development strategy. Now, in compliance with the ADF 15 policy commitment, the Bank Group is embarking in the preparation of its 3rd strategy on fragility, and is also engaged on a holistic review of the ADF allocation and operational framework through an in-depth consultation process to ensure coherence with the long-term strategy trajectory of our fragility agenda. Now, let's go to the next slide, please. I'm going to walk you now through some kind of guiding principle that's actually help us to work in fragile context. Again, these are not mutually exclusive and should be applied to all instances of working in fragile context. So could you please let me start with the slide that comes with this one, please, the other slide. So we'll start with the do no harm principle. Now, this is very critical in terms of intervening in fragile context. What it is that we need to take into account when we talk about the do not harm. This is about providing or investing in infrastructure for one community. We have to take that into account, that doing that may actually exacerbate conflict within the community or heighten tension between neighboring communities. Also, the do not harm also, help us to guard against this type of situation. The humanitarian actor or any other actor, we need to take into account the do not harm guiding principle when we design our intervention. The do not harm principle also allows for the development of changing options instead of sustaining or strengthening dividers, and whenever possible, contributing to the de-escalation of conflict. For example, if you are building a water well in a community without prior consultation with the beneficiary, and actually taking into account the will of those beneficiary, may have unintended consequences that could lead to frustration and exacerbate conflict dynamics. We can also talk about conflict analysis. Intervening in fragile situation, we need to take into account the conflict analysis, because we know that when we talk about fragility, we're actually exposed to dealing with the most vulnerable people in the community, with the bottom 30 of the pyramid, but also dealing with some situations that are not conducive to development. So conflict analysis is the systematic study of the profile, the cause, the actor, and dynamic of conflict. And it provides a snapshot of the conflict to an organization, thereby providing an idea of what type of intervention fits well in those settings. So we cannot, ignore this when we deal with, we try to implement or design our project in conflict environment. So it actually goes with the conflict sensitivity, which means that we need to understand the conflict context, also understand the interaction, between our intervention and the conflict context, and now develop options or programs and management objectives that reduce the intervention's negative impact and strengthen its positive effect in relationship to various conflict dynamic. So in short, it means that, we need to realize that our work could have potentially negative and positive effects on the operating context, and now using a conflict sensitive lens might actually help to mitigate those effects. Next slide, please. Let's go back now to the other slide about the other guiding principle. If we take the current strategy, that strategy has three pillars, strengthen state capacity and establish effective institutions. The second one is about promoting resilient society through inclusive and equitable access to employment, basic services, and share benefit from natural resource endowment. And the third one is actually enhance the bank group's leadership role in policy dialogue, partnership, and advocacy around issues of fragility. Moreover, in line with the regional approach recommended by the high-level panel on fragility, the current strategy is guided by 4 principles of engagement. So we needed to move from the concept of fragile state to that of fragile situation, because as we know, fragility is not confined within borders. You may take any country in the world, developing, they all have pockets of fragility. There is no single drivers of fragility that you will find in a country in, let's say, Africa, that you will not find in any country in, let's say, in America or in Europe. Now, that's why we cannot just target some countries as being fragile, So we clearly move away from that binary view and trying to implement actions toward a fragile situation. In that regard, all countries on the continent are, we make sure that we take into account in the programming and also in the operation of all countries, the fragility aspect, regardless of the state of the country. The second principle was staying engaged for building long-term resilience. So no matter what the situation is, the banks must stay engaged in the country. The level of engagement now depends on the severity of the crisis or the conflict. Third, we need to be very responsive. We need to be selective and make sure that we have a tailored solution to the ongoing situation. And fourth, we need to build strategic alliances and make sure that we have this country ownership, which is in line with the principle agreed under the New Deal for engagement with fragile states or fragile situations. Yes, when the New Deal was developed, we were talking about fragile state. That's why you actually hear when we talk about the New Deal, it refers to fragile state. But again, it's just because it was developed when we were still under the terminology of fragile state. Next slide, please. Now, like I mentioned earlier, fragility is not really confined to specific borders. So we are going to look at how the bank actually work to make sure that as in using a one bank approach, we are able to work together on the fragility agenda. You will notice that the fragility is currently maybe the RDTS, which is the department in charge of fragility, lead the event. But the reality is that we have to work together. The objectives are there. You have the inclusive growth and the transition to green growth. And the core priorities are also there. We use the high five to make sure that we extract what we need to build community resilience. And the special emphasis are clearly mentioned, like the three areas that I mentioned earlier: strengthening state capacity, promoting inclusiveness to build a resilient society, and also lead in terms of policy dialogue. So those are clearly, expressed in the strategic paper, in our project, in the various processes that we use. We're trying to build our financial instrument so that it addresses all these aspects. And then we build capacity internally, but also externally with our partner to make sure that they understand how our fragility agenda works. Next slide, please. Now, you are talking about the level of engagement. It's actually the same as we just mentioned earlier. We have the policy analysis, we have the organization and institutional, our framework, the programming, and the individual. This is the four main elements that we have to take into account in building, working as one bank to make sure that everyone is actually concerned with the fragility agenda. It's not just the work of one department, it's actually the work of the, it's a multi-departmental work. So let's go to the next slide, please. I'm trying to be a bit, to go a bit fast here because I was given about, let's say 20 minutes to do the presentation, and, talking about fragility, it's very difficult to just talk without getting into details. So again, here we have the resources. So I'm just trying to be very brief. Here we have the resources that we use. It's not only the TSF, because people, when we do our intervention, most of the people believe that if a project does not involve the TSF resources, then we don't have to actually, apply the fragility lens. That's not true. We have to use all the resources available to implement the fragility lens in our project, in our program, in our project. So next slide, please. Now we have some lesson learned from the BDEV evaluation, from the report from the BDEV evaluation, but also from the implementation of the fragility, and also from the emerging challenges that we've gone through, how we have approached them, how other institutions are also approaching the fragility agenda. So we have some lessons learned. So since they are just self-explanatory, I'm not going to go through them, but they are listed there, and we can just read as the as they are disclosed. So the next slide, please, is still going to be on the lesson learned. So I believe this slide, this presentation are going to be shared so they can be seen. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Now, how do we mainstream fragility? This is a very important part of our work. Before we get into the mainstreaming of fragility, these are some of the results that we have achieved, from 2010 to 2019, only in transition states, using the bank's high five results. This is what we have achieved, and these are very impressive. Let's say if we have to we believe that we can do more of this, in the coming years, we can do more of this when we try to address some of the challenges that we've encountered. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, fragility is a bank-wide operation. So if you look at the left, those are just a sample of everyone that is involved here. You have at the country level, we need to make sure that our fragility assessments are owned by the bank. It's not an RDTS document, it's actually a bank document. So everybody, all the sector are supposed to be involved in the development of this study. And once that we have a report, it's a bank-owned report. The report makes recommendation on the many challenges of the country. Or if it is a regional fragility assessment, the report will make the recommendation on the regions. Once the recommendations are made at the level of the country, we have two things that need to be done. We need to make sure that the fragility report also is kind of owned by the local authorities, so as to inform the development of their national development plans. And at the level of the bank, we want to make sure that the development of the country strategic paper takes into consideration the recommendation of the report of that fragility assessment. Because the strategic pillars that we will be selecting for the bank's intervention in the country in the next 3 or 5 years need to address the funding, the challenges that we have found in the country during that assessment. And this is why we emphasize the fact that it has to be a bank-owned document. Now, once we have the strategy paper developed based on the recommendation from the fragility report, we are kind of sure that the operations are also going to be in line with those challenges, because operations are there to address the challenges. But at the same time, the fragility report is not only there to pick up on the challenges, it's also there to try to see where are some resilient sources, where can we build, where are the entry point for intervention. And the report has all these elements, and we need really to focus on them. What are the pressure, but also what are the capacity? Where can we focus to try to address all these issues? Okay, next slide, please. So this is what we say, the first step is to assess the fragility. I'm just going to be very brief here. Assessing the fragility means that we conduct this fragility assessment in the context of the bank. Because for us to be able to address some challenges, we need to understand the challenges first. And this is the first element, the first of the 3 elements of intervention, because you have to assess, you have to implement, and then you have to follow, you have to monitor. So at this level, this is where we conduct the assessment, the studies to find out where are the challenges. And it has to be through the fragility assessment or through some sectoral studies, those are the kind of, and we also have the CRFA, the Country Resilient Fragility Assessment, which is our analytical tools to, for fragility. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we have these very important tools that we've developed, and it's been approved to be used on our fragility intervention. It's tools that provide a quantitative baseline. It has 7 dimensions, and we have 28 subdimensions with 57 indicators, all to deal with fragility. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the interpretation of the CRFA. Now it depends on how you view it. We have pressure, but we also have capacity. When you have low pressure with high capacity, it's always a good option. It means that you are able to intervene in any circumstances. But you also have situations where you have low capacity with high pressure, and this is where we actually see that in that situation the country is in very deep trouble, because when you have pressure without the capacity to address the pressures, you are very faced with some kind of difficult situation. We will see that when we really touch on the diagram of the CRFA. Next slide, please. Yeah, the full-fledged fragility assessment, this is something that I talk about. It's a very important document when we in all the fragile situation. During the ADF 15, one of the ADF 15 commitment was to make sure that we have a fragility assessment conducted in all transition states by midterm review. That's by end of this year, and in all ADF countries by the end of the cycle. So you can understand that even at the high level of the bank, we are taking the fragility assessment very seriously, because this is what should be guiding our operation. We cannot just design project without taking into account the drivers of fragility that are in the country. And for us to do that, we need to conduct these studies, and it has to be owned by the bank. Next slide, please. And the mainstreaming of fragility, once we have actually finalized it, I have the impression that we are just saying exactly what we meant earlier here. With the strategic paper, the operational design, and the policy dialogue. The policy dialogue now here is very critical. As you know, some of the drivers that we will find may be out of the mandate of the bank. If we are talking about political drivers of fragility, if you are talking about security drivers of fragility, the bank will not intervene directly when it comes to these drivers of fragility. We cannot design an operation that is just going to go, and address directly a war, a war between community. No, we cannot design project that will go and deal with political. No, what we do here is to use our convening power in policy dialogue to address this issue with the local authorities at the highest level possible. Yeah. Next slide, please. Now, the resilience-based methodology, once we have done the fragility assessment and we are mainstreaming the fragility assessment in our programming and operation, those are the 9 steps that we have to take into account. We have to really make sure that we have this to address the issues that were raised in the report. So I'm not going to go through them because they are self-explanatory. So let's go to the next slide, please. And we have some recommended practice, when it comes to resilient-based priorities, what need to be done, and also on the national, regional priorities. As you know, fragility cannot only be resolved at the national level. The best way to resolve fragility issues is to look at on the regional aspect, like you're taking a bird's view, to make sure that all the issues around the main source of fragility are also addressed. Otherwise, it's just like you are just pushing the dust under the carpet and believing that the floor is clean. So what we need here to have is to use our bird's eye and trying to see very widely where the issues are and take them into consideration when we address the drivers at the national level. We need also to make sure that the operations are well aligned and also that they are owned by the local authorities, by the countries, because these the project that we design are for the countries. And we talked about the do not harm earlier. We cannot just go and start imposing project upon countries. Next slide, please.
Emil, I don't want to cut you, but we have to wrap up, please.
Okay. Yes, again, they are talking about recommended practices. So the data-informed approach, that's what we do when we use the fragility assessment with the CRFA. The targeted narrative, exactly, the narrative are coming from the recommendation from that assessment. And the main issue that we are trying to do here is to build resilience, is to actually move from fragility to resilience. Next slide, please. And also, as we talk about fragility, we have to be very mindful of the way that we express those drivers, the tone that we use in our document. Yes, fragility is not always an easy issue to talk, and people may not be happy about the way that they are being described or things are being described in their country. But again, it's up to us to know that we are using the right tone, to soften the tone, even though it's critical for us to address the key issue. We cannot shy away from them. We have to address them, but in a diplomatic way also. The quality assurance is very critical in our work. We have to make sure that when the projects are actually before the project goes to the board, we make sure that the fragility are taken into consideration. We have also to promote selectivity. We cannot do everything at the same time. We have to be very selective and making sure that the project that we are taking are critical at that specific moment. Next slide, please. And here, this is the last step, which is actually for us, once we have done everything, we need to make sure that we kind of engage with the country we implement, we engage with the task team with the country to make sure that the operations are moving in the direction that we wanted. Next slide, please. And here is just the timeline for the new strategy. In fact, I'm not going to go through here. And maybe on that note, my colleague, we discuss about this new strategy. It's only the timeline that's there. And on this note, I'm going to end the presentation there. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Emil. As you said, fragility is a very complex topic, but thank you for giving us the roadmap as to how the bank is engaging in fragile situations and the different formalities that we're using to address fragility. I just wanted to recall to our participants to please use the Q&A box if there are questions that arise during the presentations. As Emil mentioned, there's a lot of good information there, but we have to move along pretty quickly. So there will be a time for discussion where you can ask your questions. You can also express your own involvement in fragile situations and your lessons learned from your participants. So please put your name in the Q&A box if you would like to ask a question or if you'd like to intervene later in the program. I'd like to continue now with my colleague, Mr. Clement Bansé, who is the Chief Evaluation Officer and also the Evaluation Task Manager for the report evaluation that was done on addressing fragility. He will discuss how strategic is the AfDB's engagement in fragile situations. So I'd like to call Mr. Clement Bansé. Je pense qu'il va parler en français. Donc, si vous avez besoin, if you need interpretation, please use the interpretation icon to hear his presentation in English. He will be speaking in French. Merci beaucoup. À vous, Clément.
Merci, Christine. J'espère que mon écran est visible.
Oui, oui.
OK, très bien. Alors, c'est toujours un plaisir pour nous de partager les résultats de nos évaluations. Et il faut dire que j'ai eu le privilège, bien sûr, de conduire l'équipe qui a évalué la stratégie de la banque. Et comme Émile l'a si bien expliqué, la banque a, un instant, comme Émile l'a si bien expliqué, la banque a pris un certain nombre d'objectifs et d'engagements à travers sa stratégie. Et notre évaluation consistait à vérifier si cela est effectif sur le terrain. Donc, ma présentation s'articulera un peu sur ces différents aspects. Je ne vais pas m'attarder sur les questions d'objectifs parce que Karen, dans son intervention, est revenue là-dessus. Est revenu là-dessus. Donc, pour gagner en temps, nous allons aller rapidement sur les autres points. Je parlerai brièvement des questions d'évaluation, de l'approche méthodologique que l'on a adoptée au cours de cette évaluation. Nous allons nous focaliser plus sur les résultats de l'évaluation et bien sûr terminer par quelques recommandations. Alors, il faut dire que comme Karen l'a dit, on visait essentiellement deux objectifs, c'est rendre compte de l'effectivité de la mise en œuvre de la stratégie et bien sûr voir dans quelle mesure on peut tirer des enseignements pour informer la future stratégie de la banque. Et donc, nous avons regardé les questions de pertinence, la question d'efficacité de la banque dans la mise en œuvre de cette stratégie. Alors, pour atteindre ces objectifs, nous avons reconstruit la théorie de changement de la banque, ça veut dire une forme schématisée sur la base de la revue documentaire des interviews que nous avons eues, mais également des bonnes pratiques au niveau international. Nous avons conçu la théorie des changements de la banque qui montre de façon schématique comment elle intervient et compte intervenir au niveau des États en transition. Et sur cette base, nous avons conçu 4 principales questions d'évaluation suivant les 4 principaux critères d'évaluation que sont la pertinence, l'efficacité, l'efficience et la durabilité. Eh bien, dans un premier temps, on s'est posé la question, est-ce que notre stratégie, elle est pertinente pour répondre véritablement aux besoins des pays en transition? Était-elle pertinente au début? Était-elle toujours pertinente aujourd'hui? Ça, c'est la question que nous nous sommes posée. Dans un second temps, on a essayé de voir comment est-ce que la banque, parce que dans ses engagements, elle s'est engagée à intervenir de façon rapide au niveau des États en transition. Est-ce qu'effectivement sur le terrain, c'était le cas? En matière d'efficacité, alors, est-ce que sur le terrain, à travers nos interventions, y a-t-il eu des résultats concrets sur le terrain qui ont contribué à réduire la fragilité ou à renforcer la résilience dans les pays en transition? Et après cela, nous nous sommes posé la question pour voir si résultats il y a eu, est-ce que ces résultats ont des probabilités d'être pérennes sur le terrain. Voici les 4 principales questions que nous nous sommes posées. Et pour répondre à ces questions, nous avons établi l'approche méthodologique suivante qui se base sur une approche mixte où nous avons collecté des informations quantitatives et qualitatives, mais basée également sur plusieurs composantes, 6 au total. Nous avons conduit une enquête à l'intérieur et à l'extérieur de la banque. Nous avons revu le portefeuille de la banque dans tous les pays en transition pendant la période de la stratégie. Nous avons mené une méta-analyse pour voir quelles sont les évaluations que les autres institutions, quelles sont les études qui ont été faites sur la question de la fragilité pour voir un peu comment la réflexion sur cette question a évolué dans le temps. En plus de cela, pour principalement les questions de résultats, nous avons fait des études de cas, principalement dans 4 pays, le Libéria, le Soudan du Sud, la RDC et le Tchad. Ensuite, nous avons regardé un aspect qui est important quand on parle de fragilité, c'est le genre, c'est de voir dans quelle mesure la banque a pris en compte cet aspect transversal à travers ces stratégies et ces opérations. Et enfin, voilà. Et nous avons fait enfin une étude comparative pour voir, alors, qu'est-ce que les institutions sœurs comme la Banque mondiale, l'Union européenne ou l'Agence française, comment ces institutions aussi travaillent dans les pays en transition pour voir qu'est-ce que l'on peut apprendre d'elles. Alors, maintenant, qu'est-ce que nous avons trouvé comme résultat? Dans un premier temps, la bonne nouvelle est que nous avons trouvé que la stratégie, elle est pertinente. Elle était pertinente, elle est toujours pertinente pour répondre bien sûr aux priorités des pays en transition. Nous avons vu qu'elle était bien alignée sur la stratégie décennale et de la banque et bien aussi d'autres stratégies qu'Émile a citées dans sa présentation, donc je ne vais plus revenir là-dessus. Nous avons noté en termes de conception que globalement, elle est satisfaisante, même si nous avons constaté quelques lacunes. Notamment, nous avons vu que la stratégie elle est plus focalisée sur la réaction et un peu moins prévention des aspects de fragilité. En plus de cela, nous avons vu que au niveau de la stratégie, elle n'a pas pris en compte des aspects qui émergent comme des sources potentielles de fragilité, notamment les questions liées à la migration, liées aux déplacés internes. Alors, cela montre bien sûr que notre stratégie a atteint un niveau où elle a besoin d'être actualisée pour intégrer bien sûr ces nouveaux aspects. Nous avons relevé d'autres lacunes que je ne vais pas m'attarder là-dessus et nous pourrons revenir là-dessus pendant les discussions. Alors, en termes d'engagement, la banque a pris l'engagement de travailler de façon différente dans les États de transition. Donc, nous sommes allés voir si concrètement, sa façon de travailler dans les États en transition est effectivement différente. Dans un premier temps, elle a pris l'engagement d'augmenter ses approbations dans ces pays. Eh bien, pour ceux qui savent, pendant ces dernières années, nous avons vu que nos allocations, nos mobilisations de ressources à travers le guichet FAD de la banque a légèrement décliné à la baisse, mais en même temps, nos analyses ont montré que la banque, à travers la mobilisation des différents autres instruments, est arrivée à augmenter ses engagements dans les pays en transition de plus de 50%, ce qui est une bonne nouvelle comparé bien sûr à 5 années plus tôt. Nous avons également vu en matière des opérations du secteur privé qu'il y a eu une légère amélioration au niveau de la part des opérations approuvées dans les pays en transition sur le portefeuille global du secteur privé de la banque. C'est certes un progrès, mais nous savons que pour véritablement arriver à changer les choses sur le terrain, nous devons faire mieux que cela. Et l'évaluation a montré qu'il y a encore des contraintes particulières sur le terrain. Nos instruments de financement ne sont pas très adaptés aux capacités, aux réalités du terrain des petites et moyennes entreprises dans les pays en transition. Nous avons vu que la banque, à travers son instrument de facilité, est arrivée, bien sûr, à apporter des financements substantiels pour les pays. Et en termes de taux d'absorption, effectivement, elle est satisfaisante pour ces piliers 1 et 3. Je crois qu'on pourrait revenir en détail si c'est nécessaire. Toutefois, on a constaté que cet instrument qui a été conçu en 2018, et du moins en 2008, aujourd'hui, n'est pas en mesure de permettre à la banque d'intervenir dans certaines situations nouvelles, mais on reviendra là-dessus si nécessaire. Toujours en termes de résultats, il est ressorti que la banque a pris l'engagement de renforcer ses capacités en matière d'analyse de la fragilité. Émile, dans sa présentation, est revenu là-dessus. Et donc, nous avons essayé de voir comment est-ce que cela est réel sur le terrain. Eh bien, nous avons recensé exactement 64 produits de connaissances que la banque a générés sur les questions de fragilité, couvrant des pays en transition, des régions, mais également des pays qui ne sont pas classifiés comme fragiles au sein de la banque, ce qui est une bonne chose. Je note au passage que l'évaluation n'a pas apprécié la qualité de ces documents, mais juste vérifié leur existence et voir dans quelle mesure ces outils ou ces documents étaient pris en compte dans ces stratégies et opérations. Nous avons noté également avec satisfaction, et Émile a abordé cet outil innovant que la banque a approuvé en 2018, c'est le CRFE. Je ne vais pas m'attarder là-dessus. C'est un instrument qui permet également à la banque d'analyser les questions de fragilité. Et nous avons noté que cet instrument a beaucoup de potentiel, mais également elle regorge beaucoup d'exigences. Et si vraiment la banque voudrait à l'avenir tirer véritablement profit de cet instrument-là, elle doit se donner les moyens pour se l'approprier. Et surtout, l'instrument demande beaucoup d'informations. Un autre point important à préciser est que cet instrument-là, nous avons noté qu'il y a une faiblesse en termes de cohérence, d'alignement entre cet instrument et la stratégie. Pourquoi? Et la stratégie a été conçue sur la base de
Clément? I think we have lost the...
Have we lost Clément?
I think so. There's a connectivity issue. I will give it a few seconds, and then maybe he can address some of his points. Yes, I believe he has dropped off the call. So let's continue with the program. Unfortunately, it seems that there's some connectivity issues and he has dropped off. So I want to now pass the floor to our discussant, El Hajba, who is the Chief Policy Economist for the Vice Presidency of the Private Sector, Infrastructure and Industrialization Complex at the African Development. He's there. Clément, are you back?
Yes. Sorry,
Okay.
j'ai eu coupure de courant, c'est vraiment les aléas du direct.
Okay, so I'll let you finish your presentation. Please continue. You have a few minutes.
Share my screen. Do you see?
Not yet. Okay, there you are.
Okay, sorry. Okay. Désolé pour ces imprévus. Alors, où est-ce que j'étais? Je crois que j'étais là.
Voilà.
Okay. Alors, très bien. Donc, je parlais du CRFE. Il faut dire que la stratégie de la banque a été conçue sur la base de 4 dimensions, notamment politique, économique, sociale et environnementale. Alors qu'en examinant cet outil innovant, nous avons vu que celui-ci est basé sur 7 dimensions. Ça veut dire en plus des 4 dimensions de la stratégie, couvre plus les aspects liés, bien sûr, à la sécurité multinationale. Donc, il y a une nécessité d'harmoniser pour renforcer un peu l'alignement entre la stratégie elle-même et bien sûr cet outil innovant. Alors, un autre aspect et Émile a parlé de ça, c'est très important, c'est comment prendre en compte la fragilité dans nos DSP, nos documents de stratégie pays et nos opérations. C'est cela qui est très après avoir généré de la connaissance, comment est-ce qu'on transmet l'opération. C'est cela que nous avons regardé. Des documents de stratégie que nous avons examinés. La bonne nouvelle est que plus de 80% ont pris en compte les aspects de fragilité de façon satisfaisante. Et pourquoi cette bonne performance? Nous avons vu que RDTS a fait un effort pour former plus de 80% des contre-économistes sur les aspects de la fragilité, et cela se traduit bien sûr par des performances à ce niveau, des bonnes performances. Qu'en est-il au niveau des opérations? Et c'est là que les nouvelles sont moins bonnes. Moins de 50% ont pris en compte, ont appliqué de façon satisfaisante le prisme des fragilités. Et quand nous avons essayé de comprendre, nous sommes allés voir les rapports de formation que RDTS a fait et nous avons vu que le nombre de sectoriels qui ont bénéficié de formation sur les questions de fragilité était relativement faible. Et voilà pourquoi, bien sûr, cela se traduit par une performance peu satisfaisante en termes de prise en compte de la fragilité. Sur le terrain, on a discuté avec nos collègues qui ne savaient pas exactement de quoi il s'agit quand on parle de prisme de fragilité, quelle est la démarche pour intégrer cela dans les opérations. Donc, il y a des toujours en matière de les aspects transversaux, stratégie et nos opérations. La bonne nouvelle est qu'en termes de prise en compte du genre et des aspects liés au renforcement des capacités, la situation est satisfaisante. Elle est moins quand il s'agit de prendre en compte les questions environnementales, les questions liées au changement climatique, des ressources naturelles, etc. Au niveau des engagements pour prendre en compte politique et stratégie, à ce niveau, nous avons constaté qu'il reste quand même une grande marge de manœuvre à faire à ce niveau. Nous avons noté que notre politique en matière d'acquisition a très bien pris en compte les questions de fragilité, a introduit des flexibilités qui permettent à la banque d'aller un peu plus vite en matière d'acquisition quand il s'agit des politiques quand il s'agit des achats au niveau des pays en transition. Et un autre aspect, c'est de voir dans quelle mesure d'autres travaux sont en cours, notamment sur les résultats que la banque utilise pour ses allocations. Ces réflexions sont toujours en cours. Des réflexions, il y a des travaux en cours également pour intégrer la fragilité dans notre manuel d'opération. Je crois que cela. Mais il y a encore des dérogations que la banque ferait quand il s'agit des pays en transition. Cela montre que nous devons continuer, bien sûr, à prendre en compte des questions de fragilité dans nos politiques. Toujours en matière de après l'engagement d'être réactif, la situation est difficile. Et le constat que l'évaluation a fait est que cela est effectif. Il y a eu des situations difficiles où d'autres partenaires sont partis, mais la banque est restée. Le cas, par exemple, de la partenaire ont quitté le pays, le banque avec ses staffs sont restés sur le terrain, accompagner le pays jusqu'à ce que la situation se stabilise. Et partout où l'évaluation est passée, ça c'est un point fort que les pays membres régionaux ont relevé, c'est qu'ils se sentent vraiment proches de la banque et la banque doit œuvrer, n'est-ce pas, à maintenir ce niveau de confiance. Alors, elle a essayé aussi, quand on parle de fragilité, on parle d'évolution de contexte. La banque a essayé bon à mal à s'adapter, à adapter ses interventions en fonction de l'évolution du contexte dans les pays. Ça aussi, ça a été apprécié par les pays membres régionaux, mais le revers de cela est qu'elle a perdu en termes de sélectivité. Alors, vouloir répondre à toutes les sollicitations opérations, au finish, la banque se retrouve dispersée. Par exemple, en RDC, sur la période de la stratégie, la banque a été active dans 9 secteurs avec des ressources limitées. Vous êtes d'accord avec moi qu'avec cela, ça réduit considérablement l'impact de nos projets sur le terrain. Alors, au niveau des autres pays, Libéria, Tchad, elle était présente dans 6 secteurs, au Soudan du Sud, dans 5 secteurs. Donc, il y a des progrès à faire en matière de sélectivité et bien sûr, pour avoir discuté avec nos collègues sur le terrain, cela est un défi, mais la banque doit pouvoir le régler. Alors, en matière institutionnelle, il faut également saluer des progrès à ce niveau. La banque a formé les gens, oui, par rapport aux objectifs que RDTS s'était fixé à la base. Au terminus, elle a former plus de gens sur les questions de fragilité, tant au niveau interne qu'externe. Mais le bémol à ce niveau, comme je l'ai dit tantôt, c'est qu'elle a manqué, la banque a manqué de former un nombre assez significatif de sectoriels pour qu'ils puissent prendre en compte la fragilité au niveau des opérations. On a noté à la faveur du DBDM également que la banque s'est rapprochée plus des pays, particulièrement nous avons noté l'ouverture de 2 bureaux supplémentaires au Niger et en Guinée, faisant passer le nombre de bureaux dans les États fragiles de 13 à 15 sur un total de 20. Ça, c'est des progrès. Nous avons noté également le renforcement en termes de staff profil en transition. Ça également, toutefois, à travers sa stratégie, la banque a pris l'engagement de gérer ce pays en transition à travers les bureaux locaux. Alors, nous avons constaté que cet objectif, sur les 4 pays que nous avons regardés, c'est seulement au Libéria que cet objectif a été atteint et la banque gère plus de 80% de son portefeuille au niveau du pays. Le reste, c'est beaucoup moins et cela montre qu'également à ce niveau, il y a des progrès à faire. Alors, en matière de développement de carrière, il faut dire que nous avons également discuté avec nos collègues sur le terrain. Il est reconnu qu'il est ressorti globalement que, en dépit des efforts que la banque fait pour, bien sûr, motiver son personnel qui travaille dans des conditions difficiles, sans famille et autres, l'impression que nos collègues ont sur le terrain est que cet effort qui est fait sur le terrain n'est pas suffisamment reconnu par la banque, notamment, et ce qui intéresse les gens, c'est en termes de développement des carrières. Et ça, on le verra après, des recommandations ont été faites dans ce sens. Alors, je poursuis au niveau des résultats. Eh bien, concrètement, sur le terrain, la banque a intervenu à travers ces 3 axes de la stratégie. Qu'en est-il en matière de résultats? Alors, il faut noter que la bonne nouvelle est qu'en matière d'amélioration d'accès aux services de base, il y a eu des résultats concrets sur le terrain. Nous avons vu des améliorations, que ce soit au niveau de l'agriculture, que ce soit au niveau de l'énergie, que ce soit au niveau de l'eau. Et bien sûr des transports, nous avons constaté véritablement des résultats comparatifs là-bas. En revanche, alors, il faut dire qu'il y a eu des institutionnels qui ont produit des résultats. Il y a eu certes des réformes qui ont été mises en place pour améliorer la gestion des finances publiques, mais il est ressorti de façon globale que ces réformes et renforcements des capacités n'ont pas été suffisants pour véritablement
Clément? S'il vous plaît, Clément? Je pense qu'il y a encore des problèmes de réseau. Il était coupé encore. Donc, I'm going to pass the parole over to you, El Haj. Clément, excusez-moi, on va continuer avec le programme. Je pense qu'il y a des problèmes au niveau de connectivité, connexion chez vous. Donc, on va passer à El Haj et puis vous pouvez élaborer plus dans la partie de discussion qui va venir tout à l'heure. Maintenant aussi, on va partager tous les PowerPoints après pour ceux qui ont plus de questions sur votre présentation. Merci beaucoup. Al-Haj, I'll now pass to you for your reactions to what we've heard today as Chief Policy Economist in the private sector industrialization department. You have about 5 minutes as we are running a little behind schedule. My apologies. Over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Christine, and good morning, colleagues. Good morning, everyone. This was two very interesting presentations, first by Emile and Clément. Emile, what I can take away from your presentation is that the bank has a strategic approach based on the long-term strategies of the bank. But given the difficulty of fragility, the emphasis is on one bank, basically, because there are many issues that we need to address and one department is not enough. We need to work with different departments in order to implement the strategy, right? So that's a key takeaway for me from your presentation. Now, we have a strategy that allows, we are developing a new strategy. It is very important that we take into account the lessons learned from the IDEV evaluation and also your observation from your implementation, and also the dialogue that you continue to have and that you will have with different stakeholders. Now, Clément, he presented the evaluation, which is very interesting, and actually these evaluations from IDEV are always interesting. You learn a lot because we are doing things, but somebody need to give some space that can look at what we are doing and how we are doing and when if we are effective or not. Clément, I'll ask you some questions and I'll raise some issues before talking some things. One of the things that you talked about is that the bank is focused on reacting to situation, but not on prevention. Okay, my question to you is, how do you do prevention if many of the factors are not under our control and it's difficult for us? So you'll see why I'm saying this, right? And also, you presented that we have our activities have done achieve concrete result, but this does not really change the situation. It's not changing the drivers of fragility. So my discussion then is really to help all of us to start thinking and ask ourselves some questions so we can reflect and we can contribute to the new strategy. So, okay. So Now, my first question was why countries face fragile situations. If you look at the CRFA, we have 7 dimensions, 28 sub-dimensions, and 53 indicators. So it tells you that it's a complex problem, right? It's a very complicated issue, not difficult, not easy to address by one institution and so on. But I wanted just to summarize all these things on the 3 headings. The first for me is geography. If you are in the Sahel, you are in the Sahel, that's given. If you are in the middle of the Indian Ocean, you are there. So that if that's a source of fragility, it will be, right? But there are others that I put on the political leadership and governance issues. For me, most of the issues that, that we are facing are under this heading. If you look at the list of countries now, in my list here, there is one more country. I think now we are 20 countries, so this is the past list, so I don't recall which one is out. So many countries face these political leadership issues that lead to conflict and so on. And there is also the issue of socio and economic development that is faced by many of our countries. But socio-economic development is not only an issue of these countries, it's an issue for all low-income countries, right? So let's keep this in mind when we are asking ourselves some questions and trying to analyze this. So my question then to Banse was to say, okay, if these are some of the drivers, how do you do prevention, right? For instance, how do you prevent the case of Libya? What would you have done for Mali? You know, there was the war in Libya, and then you have arms that comes in. So how do you deal with this? I understand that in some situation where you have refugees and so on, you can act early on. But fundamentally, for most of our countries, what do you do? Okay. And also based on these factors that drive fragility, what the bank can do, right? So Emil talked about the differentiated approach, you know, the analysis to understand the situation of each country, because each case is different. So this is very important. But in my view also, we need to be humble as an institution and recognize sometimes there is not much we can do, right? So there is a situation, we can try to help afterward, but there is not much we can do because it's a political issue. If the politician, sometimes it's the government itself, is the source of the problem and there is no political will, we can come and with project, with everything, it will not change the situation. So we need to recognize these instances and support as we can. And in the places where we can look at the root causes, we need to address these root causes, because if we, one question we could ask ourselves is, what is our objective at the end of the day for intervening in fragile situations? Do we want to eliminate the fragility? Do we want to mitigate the impact? And so on. So these are important questions that we need to talk about when developing the new strategy. Now, as a development bank that has no political mandate, that is not involved in security or justice and so on, our comparative advantage is on addressing socio-economic issues. So in my view, right, we need to focus more on these socio-economic issues so we can look at how the linkage with other factors and try to address those issues. Yeah, so just a question, in the last decade, how many countries exited the list of fragile countries? It's like it's 2 since I joined the bank. So what can we learn? What have we done? And what is driving this exit? So this is a question for me that we can refer to. So fragility affects individuals, people. So what do we need to do as a bank? Then, as I said, for us, most important thing is to support livelihood and job creation, because when people have jobs and they have activities, then that occupy them instead being involved in conflict. So this is very important, and also it reduces poverty and it leads to resilience. Job creation is not an issue just for transition state, it's an issue for all most African countries. So this is something we need to work on, not just under this strategy, but it's very important under this strategy, the new strategy will do, right? In transition countries, most of the businesses are SMEs, right? So when we talk about private sector development, often let's keep in mind that if we want to support resilience, we need to support MSMEs. But Clement talked about our limited financial resources and limited tools and instruments for supporting that. So, this is something we need to keep thinking about and see how we can innovate so we can have an impact on the ground. So this last slide is just to have one thing in for private sector in general, and actually not so on the how do we expand our non-sovereign operations. Clement talked about the limit and even decline in some sense, but it's challenging environment also, right? So if you look at in these countries, you have weak governance and sector policies. So upstream work is very important. Again, the one bank approach is very important. Second issue is about project pipeline. It's difficult to have projects, especially the project size for us in the bank and so on. So this is something we need to incentivize our task managers so they can build pipeline and look at medium to long-term approach. We have high risk in general, just the country risk is high, so the project itself starts with a high risk. So, but we can do other things so we can reduce the intrinsic risks of the project. And as I said, most of it is SMEs. So we have small projects. We need to have innovative financing and look to intermediaries so we can explore have larger impact on those SMEs. The transaction cost is not negligible in those countries, so partnerships are important when we want to do business in transition state. So let me just stop here, but very interesting presentation. I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Elhaj. We'll now move into the interactive part of our program where we get to hear from our participants. So what I would like to do, let me look at some of the questions we have received. I would like for all of our panelists, Emile, Clement, if you can please turn on your video so that we can all open the floor for discussion. Thank you, gentlemen. And I'd like to first call on our colleague from Liberia. Is Alex Yene? Alex Yene, are you there? If our IT can allow Alex Yene to speak, I believe he would like, they would like to share some experiences from the Liberia context. Our IT is giving Alex access to join the conversation. In the meantime, Emil, there are some questions. Are the various diagnostic and analytical tools publicly available? For example, the CRFA, so that others can draw on your insights. And a similar question is coming from Mamadou Koulibaly. Les 54 indicateurs utilisés sont-ils publiés? Are they published? The 54 indicators that you have mentioned in your presentation. So if you can please maybe direct our participants on where they can find these on the bank website, that will be helpful. We'll start there while we're waiting for Alex to join. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for the question. Yeah, the CRFA, it's a tool that is going to be made available. You know, it's going to be made public. It's not only a tool for the bank. It's a tool that can be it's a tool that can be used by any other institution, by the civil society organization. So these tools we are working now. As you know, it's a the tool has been only developed recently. It's been approved in 2018 after 2 years of piloting it. We have already conducted 2 rounds of CRFA country profile, and the 2020 country profile is ongoing now. So yes, these tools, we are currently also working with IT to make sure that the tool is actually being made available, you know, to the public. Yes, the tool will be made available.
Thank you. All right, I see another question here from Jean Providence from the ACBF. A question to the IDEV colleagues. Fragility may not be limited in time. Its non-temporality or time-evolving nature make it difficult to evaluate. How are you embedding developmental time-evolving evaluation approaches in your work so that fragility issues are not only looked at the end of the strategy or at the end of the project, but during the entire life cycle of the project? So how are we addressing and looking to fragility, not just at the end of projects, but during the entire life cycle of the projects?
Yeah, before Clement comes in, I can, you know, provide some initial thought on this one, and maybe he's going to complement. Like I mentioned during my presentation, we have 3 steps. The first step is the analytical one. The second one is the mainstreaming of fragility. Which means that when you develop your project, you have to make sure that it's actually fragility sensitive. You have to make sure that the community, the most vulnerable, are taken into account in this project. It doesn't matter the type of project. It might be a big infrastructure project. Now you do what a fragility expert wants to see here. Out of this big infrastructure, what it is there, how can we use this big infrastructure to take into account the need of the more vulnerable. You may have in some villages, people who don't even have access to water, to drinking water. There is no, I don't know, electricity, you know, there's no schools. These are, you have to take this opportunity to make sure that we mainstream these elements into that big project. Now, to make sure that the fragility is taken into account into the whole project life cycle, we have the supervision. When we go on supervision, this is the time for us to make sure that what we've actually put in the design of the project, the activities that have been identified are being implemented properly. And at the end, this is where Clement comes at the end to evaluate the overall project. So I'm going to leave the floor to Clement, probably has something to add. Thank you.
Oui, merci Émile. Je crois que tu as très bien répondu. Au niveau de l'évaluation, nous avons procédé de la même façon. C'est de la conception des projets où d'abord nous nous sommes assurés s'il existe des études de fragilité mises à jour disponibles qui puissent être utilisées pour la conception des opérations. Si cela est OK, nous regardons comment est-ce que le prisme de fragilité a été appliqué. D'accord? Et la finalité de l'application du prisme de fragilité, c'est de montrer en quoi est-ce que, comme Émile l'a dit, les résultats du projet vont contribuer à terme à réduire la fragilité dans la zone du projet ou bien sûr à renforcer la résilience dépendant des objectifs du projet. Et bien sûr, à la fin, c'est ce que nous, sur la base des informations que nous collectons sur le terrain, nous essayons de voir effectivement si ce qui était attendu ont été réalisés ou même s'il y a des résultats qui n'étaient pas attendus également qui se sont avérés être réalisés à la faveur du projet. Donc, voici la démarche. Émile l'a très bien, je ne vais pas répéter la même chose, mais voici la démarche qui nous a permis, en fait, d'apprécier la performance de chaque projet dans le contexte de fragilité. Merci.
Merci, cher collègue. I will now pass it to Alex Yene from Liberia. I think you can unmute yourself and you can have the floor, please, from your experience in Liberia. Thank you very much.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Christine. Unfortunately, my computer went off and it's just now rebooting. So I have reconnected using my phone. Okay, so my name is Alex Yene. I'm Fragility and Resilience Officer. I'm based in Liberia. I joined the bank 2013 as a consultant, and 2014 I was hired as a regular staff. And I have been with the department, our DTS, since the breadth of our strategy from 2014 to the implementation and the extension as well. It is also important to let you know that I was in Liberia when the evaluation team came, and I had extensive discussion with the team. And I was even wondering why I had 2 hours with them when others colleagues from sector department had only 1 hour, and they were like, it is your strategy, so you need more time. And actually, I agree. I share a lot of experience with them during my 2-hour session with the team. And I see a lot of the experience that I share with them in the report, which is very good. But for the purpose of the discussion, I would like to bring in something new. All right, I would like to bring in something new, and which is in my own word, is a fundamental experience, lack of experience, or fundamental experience gap between the bank and the borrower, the government, specifically taking into consideration the implementation of fragility-sensitive operation. What do I mean by that? Emil has already walked you through the implementation of the strategy of fragility assessment and how it feeds into the CSP, the regional integration strategic paper. But just to summarize that, the bank on its own side makes sure that we in our DTS do fragility and resilience assessment, which inform the preparation of CSP and RISP, and it is also our responsibility to do strategic recommendation of pillars that will be that in the CSP. In some instances, we have some pushback from some country economies, but it is our responsibility to make this strategic recommendation. And after the CSP is approved, we come down to the implementation, looking at making sure that all projects that go to board they are fragility sensitive. So on the side of the bank, we do the theoretical aspect of designing fragility sensitive operation. Then on the government side, where I see there is an experience gap, on the borrower side, they do not have much of an experience when it comes to the implementation of fragility sensitive operation. So let's narrow that down. Let's look at the project implementation unit. When you see the composition of the project implementation unit, we have procurement officer, disbursement officer, financial management officer, and other experts, including the project coordinator. right? Looking at that composition, we do not have any fragility officer that is assigned to the project implementation unit who has the experience and expertise to be able to deliver on those fragility sensitive indicators activation in the project or logical framework, for example. So coming back to that, let's look at new project let's look at the new project that is being approved, that is being launched. When you look at the launch of a project, you have two different activities going on within a project launch. You have the political launch and you have the technical launch. When you look at the technical launch, you see that sector experts, financial management, procurement, disbursement, they more or less train the new project implementation team on the best rules and procedure as it comes to their own responsibility to make the project successful. And in that launch, you do not see a fragility expert also trying to explain the fragility sensitive aspect of the project. And we do not also have a fragility officer embedded into the project implementation unit like I indicated. Okay, so let's move a little bit forward. The fiduciary clinic that is conducted by the three departments, right? Financial management, procurement, and disbursement, only have project staff that have the expertise of working at the PIU. But I think for sure that we need to have fragility expert within the PIU, and we also need to be part of and take ownership, if not, of fiduciary clinic. So fragility experts need to be part of fiduciary clinic to make sure that we educate the project implementation unit not only on financial management, disbursement, and procurement. We need to educate the PIU on fragility sensitivity, especially if we have to achieve the intended result. All right, so this is absolutely important. When you look at the result-based logical framework, you see all the indicators and development objectives that should be achieved at the end of the project implementation, and they have all of these stages, like the midterm review and regular supervision of the project. 99.9% of those indicators are intended to address fragility and build resilience. So you see the fragility expert working with the team. I do understand, but we do not have fragility officer embedded in the PIU. Let's take, for example, I would say institutional support project, the ISP. It might be project to build the capacity of government institution so as to make sure that public financial management is understood, and we should be able to deter corruption, because a dollar saved that go into an individual pocket can provide basic social services for this people. This is fragility. Let's look at water the sanitation project. If you have an indicator that this project will need to provide pipe-borne water to this city to cover 250,000 people, that alone that indicator is intended to reduce fragility and build resilience. So basically, we want to make sure that at the end of this strategy, we capture this recommendation, and that will feed into the development of the new strategy. Because when you think about it, it is very, very important that looking at the list of fragile countries in Africa right now, which is 21, doing the implementation of ADF 15, in fact, doing the implementation of ADF 15, and also taking into consideration the implementation of the new fragility sensitive, our ultimate goal is to make sure that we reduce the number of fragile countries in Africa or transition countries in Africa. That should be our ultimate goal. And we can only achieve that if we have soldiers, fragility, I would say, officer embedded into the implementation unit of all of the project, not technical assistant project, but much more bigger project, who will be able to deliver on the fragility sensitivity as envisioned in the project appraisal report, and also the logical framework. So those are the recommendations I want to make based upon my experience working as a fragility expert in Liberia and also Sierra Leone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you. I think our colleagues have heard your call, and I think they have well noted your feedback and your intervention. We will not have time to answer all the questions as we're coming close to a close. I'd like to call on Akua, excuse me, Akua Atakizi. Are you there? You'll be to make your intervention. If you can, please keep your question or your comment brief.
No, I don't have a question now. I think it's okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So given that we are at time, we were scheduled to close at 11:30. Yes, Emile, go ahead.
If you don't mind, I was reading through the chat. I got there are two questions that got my attention. If you give me maybe 2-3 minutes, yes, one of the questions was about the ownership by the national party, the national authorities of the fragility report. So I would like to again emphasize here that when we do the fragility assessment, we make sure that all the stakeholders in the countries are actually consulted. We take into account the civil society, the private sector, the national authorities, the various associations that are, willing, available and willing to speak to us, and we put everything together. Often at the end, when we already have the approval of the bank, when the report has been approved by the bank and also by the local country office, the logic is that we need to do some kind of dissemination. The dissemination is when the authority themselves, they will invite whomever they want to come and have a discussion on the final report. That's not always the case, but that's actually what should be, that last step. But at least in terms of consultation, every single forces in the country is meant to be getting to consulted, and that's what we do. The second question was about the action, the bank's action in the G5 Sahel. I want to emphasize here that the G5 Sahel is one of the area of special interest, specific focus of the bank. You can also add the Horn of Africa, the Great Lake region, or those areas are very critical in the bank's action. And specifically in the G5 Sahel, we have a lot of intervention. There are a lot of things going on there. We've been helping women in the climate change area. We've actually supporting the executive secretariat of the G5 Sahel to give them to build their capacity to implement projects by themselves. So that's something that we've been doing since last year. So there are a lot of things that we are doing in the G5 Sahel. And I noticed that the person mentioned G5 Sahel without Chad. I don't know why is dissociating Chad from the G5 Sahel, because it's a group and we're trying to support them all together. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take the last hand that I see raised, which is for Sani Garba.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Oui, je vous remercie de m'avoir donné la parole. Oui. OK. Bon, moi, c'est une seule question que j'ai à vous poser et de savoir ce que la BAD fait pour communiquer autour des questions de la fragilité et pour l'appropriation de ce concept des membres régionaux et effectivement pour sa prise en compte dans les projets et programmes de développement. Parce que moi je pense qu'il ne s'agit pas pour la BAD tout simplement de suivre et de mettre en œuvre des projets qui évaluent selon cette notion de fragilité et de la vulnérabilité aussi. Moi, ma préoccupation, je pense que ce que la BAD devrait faire, c'est surtout d'appuyer les États membres pour qu'ils puissent intégrer les questions relatives de la fragilité et de la résilience dans leurs documents programmatiques, c'est-à-dire les plans nationaux de développement, les stratégies de développement. Et si la BAD a appuyé tous ces États à renforcer leur capacité pour la prise en compte de cette préoccupation, dans leurs documents programmatiques, l'évaluation des futurs projets financés par la BAD sera plus facile. Mais il ne faut pas que la BAD se limite à intégrer ce concept ou cette préoccupation dans les activités ou dans les projets qu'elle met en œuvre, mais il faut qu'elle appuie les États pour qu'ils prennent en compte cette préoccupation dans la planification même de leurs interventions. C'est ça que je voudrais vous faire remarquer. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup. Oui, Emile.
Oui, si je peux juste rassurer notre participant que la BAD tient également en compte ces préoccupations-là. Je peux déjà signaler qu'au niveau des pays membres régionaux, la banque a des séances de formation qu'elle délivre chaque année. Je suis sûr que vous vous rappellerez que je crois que c'était en 2017, on était en Tunisie. En 2019, on était à Dakar. Et l'année dernière, compte tenu du contexte actuel de la pandémie, on l'a fait en virtuel. Donc, on a invité, les lettres sont généralement envoyées au gouverneur, c'est-à-dire à votre ministre du plan ou bien le ministre de l'économie, pour désigner ceux qui, et les critères sont bien précis, parce que nous voulons justement que ceux qui obtiennent ces formations utilisent les leçons apprises pour pouvoir informer le développement de leur plan national de développement. Donc, rassurez-vous, c'est un exercice qui se fait. Je ne sais pas si peut-être que vous n'avez pas été intégré dans cet exercice-là, mais si vous vous renseignez au niveau de l'organe central au ministère du Plan, vous allez vous rendre compte qu'il y a une équipe qui est généralement dédié et qui prend part à ces formations-là. Merci.
Merci, Emile. Unfortunately, our time has come to an end. I'd now like to call our colleague, our colleague Riyad bin Masoud, who will be giving us his closing remarks on behalf of Yerho Balda, who is the director of the Transition States Office, please. You have the floor.
Yes, thank you so much, Christine and colleagues. This is really very appreciated. Let me try to open my cam. It doesn't work. Oh, okay. So anyway, I'm keen to open my cam, but technically here I'm unable to do so. So, okay, all right, thanks. Great. No, thank you so much. Really, we really appreciate this very timely opportunity to engage a discussion on the bank fragility agenda. Allow me very quickly, I know the time we have very limited space of time, but some of the questions have been raised. I will be even more provocative on these questions. And it's also the opportunity to bring to our attention and our collective efforts, what the bank is doing, but collectively what we can do together. And here I'm referring, to the private sector, the civil society, and the various actors on the ground. Clément and some of the colleagues, I think Elhaj referred to the case of Libya, for instance. Let me give you also another example. Take the case of Uganda. Uganda is hosting the largest refugee community in Africa. Do we have the appropriate mechanism to address this issue? The answer is, unfortunately, so far, no. So the issue, of course, and here the BDEV evaluation really come at a timely momentum where we are reviewing our strategic approach. And also I had referred to the implementation of the strategy. Of course, strategies are good, but their implementation is even much better. How can we implement within, this complexity of the fragility context in the African context? How can we implement and help institutions, governments, regional economic communities, the civil society, the private sector, to all together work in order to address these complex drivers of fragility? This is really, really, and this call, the issue is the implementation of the strategy is not a matter of one department within the African Development Bank. It requires a comprehensive range of resources and capacities at the bank level, but even broadly at the community, the international community level. So again, this is why if you have a look at the 2014 strategy, partnership is a key component, is one of the key building blocks of the strategy. Partnership, advocacy, and policy dialogue are really at the heart of our strategic and operational engagement. And I think some of the colleagues and the participants alluded also to the involvement of national authorities. Yes, definitely the ultimate objective by the end of all this talk, the end game, is really to eradicate fragility and reduce at least the number of fragile situations in Africa, be it at the regional, national, or even at the community level. But in order to do so, there's really definitely a need to all of us to work together. And we really take this opportunity also to convey some clear and very, key messages regarding the bank engagement in this space. The bank has always been committed. This is a long-standing agenda since 2001, and we've been one of the first multilateral institution in the world to initiate and institutionalize, this fragility agenda. We have put in place a lot of toolkits, processes, systems. Of course, there are a lot of shortcomings. Of course, we failed it, and we did, and there's definitely a need to do more. And definitely one of the key lessons learned from the BDEV evaluation is we really need to, beef up the terms of the game in terms of implementation. Strategies are good, but then their implementation is much better. And as far as the bank strategy for addressing fragility and building resilience, this is not a traditional strategy. This is a bank-wide strategy, which require, again, the involvement of all the banks of operational and sectorial units, even at the corporate level. By the end of the day, what we are doing, we are not even thinking about creating new strategic pillars. The pillars exist and the instruments exist. All we are saying that the bank need to scale up its focus on these specific situations of fragility. So this is by way of conclusion, what I wanted to say very briefly is, yes, the bank, we are engaging in the development of the new strategy, which will cover the 2022 and 2026 period, while the current framework has been extended till the end of this year. And there's a reason for extending the current framework till December 2021. The reason is very, very simple. We want to use the development process of this new strategy to engage deeply in consultations with, the traditional partners, the traditional shareholders of the bank. But then most importantly, there is a big and a strong need to engage with the civil society, with the private sector, and we need to beef up, our engagement at the community level. So these are, you know, by way of conclusion, these are the main takeaway from the ongoing thinking. In terms of timeline, tomorrow we'll have a discussion at senior management level to discuss the concept of the new strategy. And by end of March, hopefully we'll be in a position to share with you and disclose publicly the concept note of the new strategy. I'll stop here, and if Christine and colleagues allow, we can take additional questions if you have any. Thanks.
Thank you, Riyad. Unfortunately, the time has come to close our program. I'm sure we could go on and take many more questions and dive deeper as into the conversation, into the topic. But it's been a very, yes.
Christine, pardon, je vais switcher en français. J'allais dire que malheureusement, le sujet, la discussion sur la fragilité prend toujours beaucoup de temps, malheureusement, parce que c'est la fragilité. Mais heureusement aussi, à côté de la fragilité aussi, ça donne une nouvelle opportunité pour construire la résilience et pour construire Absolument. De manière beaucoup plus appropriée et plus forte, surtout dans le contexte actuel du post-recovery après le COVID-19.
Exactement, exactement. So I do want to reassure the participants that your questions are noted and that our colleagues will be replying to you via email as you shared your email when you registered for the webinar. So on behalf of the Independent Development Evaluation Team, on behalf of the Office of Transition States, I'd like to thank all 130 participants who have been online with us for the past hour and a half, 2 hours, who have stayed until the end, and we'll be in contact very soon. Thank you to our panelists, thank you to our interpreters, to all the IT and those working on the back end who have made this event possible. Thank you for your participation, and we will join you again very soon. Thank you to all. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.